So a couple of things I want to talk about today. I want to talk both about filling in these tech and cyber roles in government and also sort of changing the structure of the workforce and what the workforce is doing. And so I thought a good place to start is to talk with you, Margot, about what do we mean when we talk about filling in the cyber and tech workforce. You kind of define the problem for us, and how much of it is about people and how much of it is about what those people are doing.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for asking that question. I think it's a good one. With the Partnership for Public Service, so we're a nonpartisan organization and nonprofit, and we're focused on trying to help the federal government be more efficient and effective. And one of the big issues is around talent and helping agencies attract the top talent that they need to be successful. And the cyber workforce and the IT workforce, I think, is an area that is of critical need for us right now. One area that we focus on a lot is the under 30 population in government. And government-wide, between 6 and 7% of the workforce is under the age of 30. In this sort of cyber field, it's 4%. So we have a real challenge here in helping the government attract the right talent and also retain that talent and develop those skills. And so I think whether it's from helping to support the critical infrastructure that we have and the many challenges that our government is facing, agencies are facing every day with potential cyber attacks and the amount of data that we need to be protecting, and to really ensuring that we have the critical infrastructure that's being protected as well. So I think we really need to be focusing on how to attract that talent to come in and also how to develop it. I mentioned the entry-level issue that I think is really of importance, but really there's a need for this type of talent at all levels. And I think some of my colleagues here on the stage can speak to different entry points, whether it's about bringing in short-term talent at the mid-career or more senior career levels to bring in innovation from the private sector or outside government. I think that there needs to be multiple entry points and multiple pipelines into government in this field. And I think it's just a very critical need for us across government. You see agencies like obviously DoD and DHS that have huge cyber needs and IT needs, but there are also a lot of needs at some of the other agencies like Commerce and HHS that have huge amounts of data that they're protecting on behalf of the American people. So
you said 4% under 30. I presume in the private sector that number's higher, right?
Right. So I don't have the number for the cyber workforce in the private sector in terms of age, but the overall workforce is around 23% or so in the private sector over the age of 30. So that's the 6% number compared to 23% in the private sector. And then for cyber, it's even lower in government.
And Matt Lira talked a little bit earlier about trying to fill in these top ranks of CIOs in government. We've done some reporting, and a lot of other people have done reporting. You guys are actually keeping a tally of political appointees that have not yet been filled in the Trump administration. Does that bleed down to the sort of frontline cyber and tech workers? Is this a, since January 2017 problem? Or to what extent is this a since January 2017 problem versus a long-standing problem?
Mm-hmm. So look, you've got a big presidential transition that we've just gone through, and this is something that happens every 4 years. And certainly there's a huge sort of changing of the guard here with thousands of political positions that need to be filled. And I will say that the current administration is further behind than we'd like to see in filling some of those top political positions compared to past administrations. But I know efforts are underway to try to close that gap. And specifically in the IT, the CIO community that you mentioned, about a third of the CIO positions right now are being led by folks who are in acting positions. And so that's concerning just in the sense that you think about how vulnerable our systems are, and should there be some type of threat or attack, you need people in place who are going to be able to steer the ship. And the career workforce, I think, is doing a phenomenal job in leading these agencies, but it's really critical that we fill those positions as well at the political level.
And so an interesting thing about this panel is everyone else on this stage, besides Margot and me, is involved in sort of not the kind of standard CIO office, but in bringing people into government, and Elizabeth, you're bringing them in and you're sending them out at the same time. So if you could just give the one sentence version of what you're doing. Either start with Elizabeth and go this direction. Tell me what you're doing, and are there lessons you've learned that you think can help either fill out the cyber workforce and tech workforce, or change what they do to make it function better?
Sure, I'm the program manager of a program at NGA, which we call Engage. And that's our geospatial exchange program where we bring people in from industry and academia, and we try to send our employees out. We're about 1 year and 4 months old, so we're still new, but what we're doing is putting all the flexibilities that the government provides in one place, so that little known or little used opportunities that we can take advantage of them. What we have learned is it's very, very hard to bring people in from private industry at this point. The department does have a new authority that came in last year in the NDAA for a public-private talent exchange program, and we're very excited that when that is actually implemented, it will give us that avenue to bring private industry employees into the agency for a period of time. Moving in a different direction, in addition to the exchanges of sending our employees out and bringing people in, we're also relooking at how we are hiring. Some people do not want to sign up for a permanent life career with the government, and they're interested because we have really complex problems in a really great environment, and we're finding that a lot of these people are very patriotic. They're willing to give us 1 year, they're willing to give us 2. But even though you and I would know that you could just quit tomorrow, the idea of signing on to permanent is kind of a turnoff. So we are really getting down for the first time at NGA in a long, long time into term and temporary employment. Bringing people in, understanding they want to come do that cool work for a while and then leave. And I would say over to Tracy that we have copied a lot of the model of the USDS in taking a look at how to attract that younger, newer workforce that kind of might have a little bit of a different driver than others.
And just before you start, Tracy, I want to remind everyone, if you have the app, please submit questions through the app. I'm going to try to take as many questions as I can later on. So you got it. Please do it. Tracy?
All right. As she mentioned, I'm with the U.S. Digital Service, and we just celebrated our 3rd birthday recently, so we're pretty excited about that, which means that when we started, we did take one of those hiring authorities, the Schedule A hiring authority, and used it as a digital service expert. So we really are looking at term employees of people coming in, experts from the tech community and site reliability engineers, designers, product managers, roles that we just don't typically have a lot of in the government, and they're coming in and trying to work on some of the most pressing citizen engagement services and trying to lend that expertise to the people that are working within the agency. So it is definitely a collaborative effort. But the model is looking at we've had people come in for 3 months to up to 2 years, or even moving from the U.S. Digital Service headquarters to an agency if they want to have some more time. But again, it isn't supposed to be a come in, do government forever, but come in, help where you can, feel the ability, get the ability to come in and actually use those skills that you're finding yourself doing in Silicon Valley and other places, bringing them into the government and helping kind of show what can be done with technology in very short amount of time. And so then kind of going back, but also we get a lot of referrals from them as well, and people going back to their companies. We've had several people come back actually and say, okay, I came here for 3 months, go back home, work a little bit, and they're like, nope, I want to come right back. And so we're kind of seeing that a little bit, but it also kind of has that industry exchange a little bit with that. And then also,
Is there an end date on that? How much time can you spend in the digital service?
So there's a couple different hiring authorities that kind of specifically talk about that. I think with the U.S. Digital Service HQ, it's kind of a 2-year term plus the potential of a 2-year re-up. I think within agencies that have the digital service, it's 1 + 1 year. So it is a short amount of time. The idea is you come in, do something, and then kind of go back out, exchange that knowledge, get something going, deliver something quickly, and then be able to go back and to your point, not looking at it as a complete career change, but we are seeing several people looking at other opportunities in the government and saying, okay, maybe this is someplace that I really want to stay, and kind of do that tour of duty model.
Ben?
Thank you. So I'm the acting director of the Presidential Innovation Fellows, and I was a fellow 4 years ago. And the Fellows Program brings in mid to senior level folks from the private sector and teams them up with agency partners to embed for basically a year or sometimes more with working on hard problems inside the agency. So I think that, like Tracy, we use the Schedule AR hiring authority, which is a 2-year sort of authority plus an optional 2-year extension. They aren't fellows the whole time. We have about half the fellows stay on for the duration of that 4 years in some capacity. We've had fellows go on to be kind of chief technology officers, chief marketing officers, chief data officer of census, and those types of positions. And I think that in answer to your second question of what have we learned, I would say that the perspective of being embedded inside the agencies gives you a kind of an inside-out perspective on how the work is done. And I think the sort of guiding the guiding principle for a lot of the fellows is that it's not just tech. It's some other things such as design and business strategy and the management science of how sort of the federal government thinks about its problems that really I think is the long sort of pole in the tent, if you will, to sort of fixing a lot of tech problems. So we think about we sort of try to tell the fellows, when you in your work think about the change you can leave behind that's more than just the particular technology or intervention that you've done. So I think for me it very much the logical next step is you come in from the outside, you embed in these agencies, you find great agency partners, you work on hard things, and then you leave, and what is that agency? How does that agency get better prepared to then do this again or begin to sort of take in some of these practices on their own? So I think that's a lot of things that we think about, and it's really hard for a lot of very understandable reasons.
And Tracy, you talked about this general idea too. You work a lot in acquisition, and the goal is to change the way agencies do acquisition so they can work better and more efficiently once the digital service person is gone, right?
Right. Yeah. Once the team has done its engagement, our model is not to become like the load-bearing pillars of any project that we're working on, in the sense that if we're not there, it's going to fail. It is enabling the agencies that we're working with through coming in, helping solve a problem, getting a minimum viable product released, or opening a data source that previously hadn't been opened before, and then setting them up with a strategy that's going to actually help that survive into long term, and then that usually aligns with acquisition. And so how do we then find companies who are able to take over the work that we've done with the agency, and then also setting up the agency in a way that they know how to get to these companies, how to make sure that they're doing the acquisitions the correct way. If you're doing agile software development and you're trying to do it with an inflexible contract, it doesn't really work out that well. And so I'm working to help train contracting officers and professionals within agencies. We call it Digital Service IT Acquisition Professional Training and Development Program, and we've run through 60 people through, and 54 have graduated so far. And they're in agencies doing these acquisitions, and they're working with the companies, and they're making the acquisition life cycle decreasing from months, from years potentially to months, from months to even, to weeks, and then also seeing products actually delivered out and actually in the hands of end users within 5 to 6 months of the contract kickoff, which is really, it reduces cost on both sides, to the government as well as to industry, and we're really trying to capitalize on all the flexibilities that are already existing within the acquisition regulations. We're not looking to try to change that. It's saying, let's take what already exists, use it for this kind of industry buying behavior, understand how they actually buy this kind of stuff, and would do it if they weren't constrained with government, and then add those constraints back in once we figured out how do we actually buy it, in a more industry-like manner, so that we're not kind of continually reinventing kind of government regulations and compliance, and at the same time really reducing risk for both sides to actually getting a culture of delivery built in agencies.
So, Margot, how much of the problem have we solved at this point? We have 3 different projects here that aren't focused on bringing in full-time career civil servants. They're bringing in people for a short period of time. So it's a little bit of the workforce numbers, but more focused on improving the efficiency of what's actually happening. How much does that solve versus actually getting those new young people into, career civil service positions?
No, that's a good question. So you've got to do both, right? I mean, I think the focus on bringing in sort of the entry-level new cyber leaders, IT leaders in government is really important. You need to be building that talent pipeline. And one of the big ways to do that is through internship programs, whether it's through the Pathways programs that has conversion authority for folks once you bring them in. There's a program that I love that I learned about recently, which is the Civic Digital Fellowship Program that was started by a group of students from Harvard, and now they have a network of over 1,000 students across the country. And this summer they piloted an internship program with Census, and a couple other agencies were unpaid, but Census had about 14 interns that were paid, and it was a great model. So that's a great way to expose students early to IT, to tech, to cyber, and help them think about how they can apply their skills and their knowledge and their interest to government, because often they think the only place to do that is the private sector. So you've got to expose them. That's really important. So I think that's one big piece, that talent pipeline. Obviously, these programs are not necessarily going to solve everything, but they're really addressing very specific targeted needs that government has and are incredibly valuable. And there are other programs in government, whether it's the Presidential Executive Fellows Program, the PMF program, Presidential Management Fellows. There are other pipeline programs as well that exist to bring that talent in. One other point I just wanted to make is that we've been encouraging agencies to think about approaching recruitment more globally and to look at hiring and from an enterprise perspective. And there's some interesting, really innovative things. I don't know if you're going to ask about this later, but I'll just bring it up. There's going to be a government-wide cyber hiring fair coming up that the CIO Council is hosting, and that's going to be in November. And that's a really terrific way to be able to do on-site interviews and hopefully make some offers on the spot. DHS has done this, and so there's been a lot of success here in thinking about how do you streamline the process for hiring to really make sure that you're bringing folks in, because young people and quite frankly talent more broadly find the hiring process too complex, too long, and we've got to find ways to streamline that and take advantage of the different authorities that agencies have and more of this global recruiting, this sort of enterprise-wide approach to recruiting and hiring.
And another thing that, the hiring process is very long. The clearance process is also very long. Does anyone want to talk about the extent to which that complicates bringing people in? Because during this career fair, the goal is to offer dozens, if not hundreds, of jobs on the spot, but those are all going to be almost all going to be contingent on passing the security clearance process at that agency.
I can mention just from the Presidential Innovation Fellow standpoint, we've had some experience with the challenges of getting clearance, and we do have some fellows who have clearance. I think that for clearance, just some of the higher levels of clearance, it's best for our program if you know about that before you are recruiting, so that you can try to find people with that. We have fellows who've worked in national security projects without clearance, and they just make it work. The agencies together, they work together, but it's always been a challenge. And I think for a shorter term hire, where you're talking a year, maybe 2 years, for clearance that might take a year, we need to think about how can that go faster, or how can we, at least for the fellows program, know about that beforehand, so we include that way up front and try to bring in the right people.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, the intelligence community, I think we all have that clearance problem, every single one of us. So what we have found is that sharing up front the clearance requirements, the clearance expectation helps us, because as we're in particular recruiting new talent from the universities or from job fairs, setting up that expectation that it can take 6 months to a year helps. Certainly we're going to lose a few people, and there are perhaps more importantly people who aren't all that interested in having a clearance. And I think our new look at bringing in term and temporary employees is also looking at, is there work that can be done without a clearance? That if you're going to come in for 3 months to 6 months to a year, are there problems that can be done on the uncleared side that can then, within the internal workings of the agency, be brought up and applied to our top secret cleared missions? And we're finding the answer is yes.
Is that happening quite commonly? Do you able to bring someone in?
It is not common yet, but it's kind of, we're going baby steps, right? Because our world is all classified, and the work may not always be classified, but it ultimately needs to be able to move there. But there's another piece here, which is the administrative piece, is that all of our systems are on what we refer to as the high side. So we have to make sure that if we were to bring people in, they're not going to be disenfranchised from the agency because they're not connected to what's going on every day, or what's this latest briefing or announcement and that kind of thing. So there's an administrative piece that we think we have a handle on, and we think we have a handle on the work, how you could do the work in an uncleared world, and then kind of transmit it to the agency. So baby steps in that direction, but it is, we're right on that cusp, and we're very excited about it.
Oh, go
Can I
ahead.
just weigh in on that one point? I wanted to mention that one of the things that I think was a big success about the DHS cyber fair that they did, or they've done a couple, but
Which is a model for the fair that's coming
which is
up
a
in
model,
November.
right, for the government-wide fair. What was successful is that when they made conditional offers on the spot, they were able to actually start the clearance process and initiate it there. And so from what I've heard, it saved between 6 and 8 weeks in terms of the hiring process timeline, which is very significant. So it's getting, if you're able to get the right folks in the room and be able to move through as much of this process on the front end at that hiring fair and start the security clearance process, that's going to help reduce the time. I was also going to mention that a lot of agencies we've talked to have been offering at least provisional clearances on the front end to bring people in. So that doesn't apply to all agencies and may not be possible in all cases, but at least you can bring people in, to do some work while you're waiting for the full clearance to go through.
And just a reminder, please submit questions through the app. A couple of them are starting to come in. Ben?
I'd like to amend my answer. I think that what both of you brought up is absolutely right. Is especially for the fellows program, some of the very you often need people from outside the area of expertise, right? In innovation, you want a diverse perspective. A lot of the skills we're looking at, especially in things like strategic design, they may not have clearance, and so the very types of people you might need for a fresh look at something, some hard problem, they're not going to have clearance. So to the extent that, we've had folks have provisional clearance, we've had multiple day-long extensions going, until they can get something going. I think that really is an issue if you want to bring in new perspectives on hard problems. I do think if it can come down from a year, to something more doable, I think that would be important.
And so, Ben, backstage, you were describing this to me. So let's say I am an innovation fellow and I fall in love with government and I want to become a career civil servant. What's the fast version of how I go through that process?
So I will say I don't have the exact answer. I will say, the fellow to be, as we talked about, like Tracy, fellows are hired on a Schedule AR authority, which is a sort of a 2-year a term plus an extension of 2 years. And same thing that 18F uses. And so, at the end of the day, you have up to 4 years to be in the government. As a fellow or a PIF, that may be only a year. But you then have the opportunity to move into other areas, perhaps the U.S. Digital Service. We've had a number of fellows go over to the USDS. We've had fellows go over to 18F. We've had fellows go and become the chief, sort of at agencies. And so there's pathways for them to kind of fill out that 4-year term in a gainful way. I'm unclear on what the ways to kind of jump to kind of career are.
You said you believe there's a 3-month window where you have to leave and then.
Yeah, so I'm unfortunately, I feel maybe I should know this, but being hired on the Schedule AR is obviously a trade-off to be able to bring people in a bit more expedited way. The idea is it's not a civil service position. So how exactly you cross that, I think I've heard that you have to be out of government for a few months to come back in or something, but I don't have a great answer for that. I wish I knew that.
So Margot, doesn't that sound too complicated?
Doesn't it sound too complicated? No, because I think, it's a different model, right? This is a different kind of model. And I think it actually maps well with career patterns and lifestyles that we have today. I think, look at most generations, young people coming in today are not looking for a lifelong career in one place. They're looking for opportunities to come in and out of sectors, to have different experiences. That may not be the answer that all agencies want to hear if they want to retain that talent. I think there are other ways that they can probably try to find ways to bring them in, again, through the competitive service. But I think, we need to have different models for talent today, because I think this is, we're not a country now where folks are looking to come and necessarily spend 30 years in one career and retire from there. So I think that these are really innovative ways to bring people in for short terms.
I will say, to that point, though, that these these avenues are available to career feds as well, in the sense of if you have the skills that you want to come and be part of this kind of these efforts and these movements as well, that you should look into that, because it's not just an external thing. Most of the procurement team that I'm working, like I just celebrated my 17th year in government, so I've been a career fed and really, took the Schedule A hiring authority as it's a little bit of a gamble, but at the same time, I believe in what USDS is doing and can make this change and be part of that is kind of a re-energizing me in terms of being a Fed and seeing that there's a lot of really good work out there that's possible within the federal government, and really getting a chance to see that, kind of be hands-on. And then when I get done with my tour of duty at USDS, I'm probably going to go back and finish out the career of being a Fed. So I think that there is both sides of that, of being able to show where there are opportunities in this kind of tech movement and cyber world, of also leveraging the talents of people who are sitting in the federal workforce and have just kind of been like, man, I really wish I could get in on this thing. I think we're also trying to create those opportunities to become partners, to learn and to train this stuff, as well as looking to the external, because it isn't going to be a complete external hire in. We can't, the mission of the government is not to become a software company or to become, a tech company. We have to use that to help our missions. And so I think where that meets and combines, that's really good synergy that we're finding, as well as it's making, people enjoy their work, and that's really kind of, enjoy their work and then also help people. That's great. You go home feeling good.
How common are you? Someone who was how normal are you? Someone who was in government and then moved over to the digital service.
So I think within our organization, we probably, I would say, have close to around maybe 15 or so that have kind of come through that path and have started with government and then come into the U.S. Digital Service, and then have gone either back have gone out into industry or have gone back into the government. So. Not a large number. I mean, obviously, into the entire U.S. Digital Service, not a very big number. We're not trying to grow to, a very large number in that sense. But I think there are other pockets of areas where we're working with acquisition, program offices and that kind of thing, that are seeing and wanting to get and jump on these trends. And as we're kind of helping them do that, what they're doing is they're kind of creating their own small empowered teams to execute and to do that. And when you become part of that, that really is pretty neat and awesome, and that can be done at any point in government.
Have you found that your knowledge base as a federal employee who lived this for 17 years is an asset among the digital service, where a lot of people don't have that knowledge base?
Yeah, a lot of it, we kind of, call it a little bit of bureaucracy hacking and that kind of thing, is that we know how to do, we know where the policies are, we know what the regulations are, we know why they exist, and what are the ones that are maybe has been status quo, that is kind of something that an office may do just because it's the way they've always been doing it, versus what is an actual regulation. We can kind of talk to the people in the agency one-on-one and have those conversations where we're like, hey, not all of us are from the outside. We understand where this is coming from, and let's kind of get to the yes together. And that definitely helps out, as well as helping set expectations for our internal, for the people coming in, to the point of security clearances and other processes that from the outside may seem completely, difficult to navigate through, and kind of give them the idea that, no, actually, this is going really fast for government, so let's just keep going with this.
So I'm going to jump to audience questions in 1 second. So this is, please submit them through the app, and if you don't, we'll start sending people around with microphones to call on you. Many times I've listened to agency heads, and this is who are testifying before Congress or who are at events, and this is a favorite statement of Admiral Rogers, the NSA director and Cyber Command chief. Someone will say, hey, what do we do about hiring? And he'll say, well, you know what, we can never compete on money, but we compete on mission, and you get to serve your country, and you get to do kind of new exciting things that are illegal in the private sector, so that's cool. And yet I always think when they say that, well, the government has been competing on mission for a long time now, and yet we still have this problem. So kind of blue skies, if anyone, if you could change something to try to fill in these jobs so that government was operating as efficiently as possible and was staffed up as much as possible, what would you do?
I'll start with that. I would say if you're in the private sector and you look at the job title that you're being hired for. Branch chief, or deputy, maybe a sort of deputy specialist. These are not titles that are in the private sector, so they strike you as, how am I going to explain that? To when I go back out to the private sector. So thinking about how, from the federal side, we can shift the positions and kind of the sort of ways to kind of catch up a bit with more of the private sector. When you want to talk about product managers, you want to talk about designers, you want to talk about software engineers. So they make sense to the people who are coming from outside of government. Go, oh great, I can see myself in that. I want to be a product manager is a new title. It's a new, it combines both the responsibility of the technology with the responsibility of building something good for users, and that comes together in that person. That is sort of what really in the private sector is now, a lot of people are interested in that. And that doesn't have an analog in the government. Now, we talk about that in USDS and the PIF program in 18F, but when you're thinking about, say, an agency getting ready to hire somebody, if they don't have if they're not using the language and the positions, and they're not sort of sending the signals of, this is the kind of work you're going to be doing, I think it's hard for people to see themselves in those jobs. So that's just one stab at it.
Well, I think it goes a step even further. So the language and the symbols is also going out to where these people are, right? For years now, we've had web pages and, come to USA Jobs and apply, and you'll hear from us in 6 months. And that doesn't work. So NGA has new outposts in locations where the cyber world is really hot. And being able to sit at the local coffee bar or go to the grouping conversations, be able to share what it is that we're doing that you might be interested in, potential employee. And maybe you're not, but you're going to tell your friends. So getting out in the world where the people that we need to hire is a big part of our blue sky.
I would just add to that. I mean, it's about education and awareness, because if the talent doesn't even understand what government does, they can't imagine themselves there or understand how their skills and their backgrounds can fit in government and what that role might look like. So it's educating and building the awareness, and then it's the translation of the job titles and what does that all mean, and figuring out the language. And I would just say, you're right, going out to the talent. I think there's a lot of innovative best practices that we can look to in the private sector. I was out on the West Coast talking to some companies out there that were looking to hire tech and cyber talent, and they use a lot of different online platforms to reach students that are really popular. Now, they may very well have an expense to them. I don't know what that is, but we've got to figure out how government can play in that space too, so that they can get access to that talent. And one of the companies that I met with there, 100% of their new hires came from their intern class. So again, they're really seeing their interns as their talent pipeline for the future.
I have an audience question here about cuts to technology budgets across government, some of which have been cut, some of which haven't. But to what extent are funding cuts affecting our ability to attract a cyber workforce? And the final line is, penny wise, pound foolish, question mark?
I think it's just part of our daily work that we have to balance. There are cuts everywhere. There are changes that cost more than the version before and that kind of thing. And it's making us look very deeply at what are the things that we don't necessarily need people to do, perhaps in the non-cyber technical fields, to be able to support the big surge that we need in a technical cyber world.
I think too, from our perspective, is looking at your acquisition strategy for when you have to. So your budget is being reduced, and instead of kind of saying, okay, let's go down to, kind of the bake-off between lowest price and that kind of thing, is really understanding how much capacity can you get for the budget that you have, relooking at how to spend that. And we've seen a lot of times where the tech that actually is needed to be deployed and delivered costs way less than, we kind of look at it, but because we put in a lot of extra things that kind of capture around that within the waterfall world and stuff, when you move to agile software development, you can have a lot less operating costs just in terms of you know, you're not building out all the reports, or you're documenting, but the real display of what is delivered is the fact that you've got working software in the hands of end users. And then you can make value decisions based on, okay, I have X amount of budget left. How do I invest this in the features that need to make this better, as opposed to saying, okay, here's the entire system, and it won't be finished until 4 years later, and it has to do everything. Let's really focus on what is giving the most value to our end users, spend the money on that, and then it'll help you realign the budget dollars to what is actually working for the people using the system.
Oh, just quick, if anyone wants to just raise your hand, we have microphones too, if anyone has a question. So raise your hand and get someone's attention. Ben?
Interesting question, penny wise, pound foolish. I don't know. I would say one thing that I have noticed is that a few key hires, we're not talking about tons, but on the agency side, in the realm of, say, product managers, right? And people who can help figure out what you're going to go buy, goes a long way towards actually holding down costs and getting good things on the other end. And we talk about acquisitions and procurement, and a lot of the activity around there is to do this work with agencies and the program staff, right, on the business side beforehand to figure out, well, what do you really need? Let's try some things out. A few key hires there can do so much, in my opinion, downstream. You specify what you need better. So, in terms of, I don't know if that's the same budget question as the question, but.
So could government ever compete on salary either with some of the authorities that have been, I think in the couple most recent National Defense Authorization Acts and Intelligence Authorization Acts, they've had some new salary flexibility. Could government compete on salary either because of that, or is it going to be sort of a generational thing where we're training all of these new STEM workers now, and supply will rise and demand will fall, and finally people are being paid less?
Well, the government has additional value add other than just salary. And
But we still have a problem, right?
especially, well, we do have a problem, but I don't know that it's as big as it's a showstopper that we all say, because there are people who are still interested in our mission. And I think if they know that this is what we can do, we're doing the maximum, not because we're putting you on a grade and you're going to earn a step every 2 years and 3 years, take that kind of thing out of the picture. Here's the salary that we can offer. Here's the benefits that we can offer. And here's the lifestyle that we can help you have in the hours and the flexibility of where you're going to work and how you're going to work and those sorts of things. And is it a pure dollar exchange? No. But in the bigger picture, I think we can come pretty close for a lot of people, not everybody, but certainly for a lot of people, to have the life they want, do the work they want to do.
I think it's also, as we go forward with these kind of industry exchange models, where the tour of duty to come to government is kind of seen as something that's similar along the lines of, if you're, in the legal community, you serve as a public defender for some time. If you can come in and we can show to the rest of industry that coming and doing time in government is worthwhile to your full-time career, then I think that, we would actually probably get a lot more people coming in at the younger age, right out of college, coming in and trying to find a place that they can use those skills before maybe going out and trying to jump into the really competitive world. And they've got some actual background and skills that they've learned and have experience, that if you try to get that exact same thing within the industry that you're trying to compete in, you may not get that. And so I think us being able to talk to industry as well and saying, for those companies that are looking for this kind of talent, that this is another place to have a proving ground for the people that you want to eventually hire and promote within your companies. That's great. But at the same time, we get a lot of benefit around that new talent, around having that kind of thing. And some of them may decide to stay, as a long-term thing, and some of them may decide that that's not something it is. But I think to your point earlier is that we kind of need to stop looking at government service as a full-time career for everybody, and that doesn't always necessarily work in the tech community, where it may work in some other ones.
And an interesting thing is to go back to the very beginning, I remember seeing the first graduating Innovation Fellows class. And I think I've seen at least similar pictures from USDS. Way more than 4% of them are under 30, right?
Yeah.
Closing out in just a second here, Margot.
So I was going to say just one last comment is that I think you've got to look at the total package beyond the compensation, the salary piece alone. And I think we need a more flexible system where there's more of a menu of options that we can offer to employees, because not everybody coming in right now is really concerned about retirement. That benefit may not be what is going to be attractive to them. Maybe they want time off or they want flexibility or whatnot. And so we've got to change the way we think about this so that, especially for this type of talent, because this type of talent is used to working in a more flexible environment and in a more casual and a more fun environment, right? If it's coming from the private sector, for example, or if it's a younger generation coming in. So I think we've got to figure out how government can be more agile and flexible in that way.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you to all of the panelists here. And hold one second for Connie.